Okay, so first things first, we're gonna need to look at a clip from one of my favorite movies, True Romance.
Now, the first time you kill somebody, that's the hardest. I don't give a shit if you fucking Wyatt Earp or Jack the Ripper. Remember that guy in Texas? The guy up in that fucking tower killed all them people? I bet you green money that first little black dot he took a beat on, that was a bitch of the bunch. First one is tough, no fucking fooling.
This monologue delivered by James Gandolfini, of which I've really only shown you a short piece, always makes me think of two things. First, it reminds me of this scene from The Third Man.
Victims? Be melodramatic. Down there. Would you really feel any pity if one of those dots stopped moving forever? If I offered you 20,000 pounds for every dot that stopped, would you really, old man, tell me to keep my money? Or would you calculate how many dots you could afford to spend? Free of income tax, free of income tax.
I think we can assume that since Quentin Tarantino is the screenwriter behind True Romance, the similar use of the word dots to refer to human beings is probably a subtle nod to The Third Man. More importantly, this scene from True Romance always makes me think of Margaret and Kathy Whitman. James Gandolfini's character mentions that guy in Texas, and he's referring to Charles Whitman, who in 1966 shot several people from the top of the UT Tower in Austin, Texas. I'm from Austin, Texas. Kind of haunts the town that I grew up in, but I think most people have heard of this shooting because it's considered to be one of the first major mass shootings in American history, if not the first. The thing is, at least in my experience, anytime I hear people talking about this shooting, I feel like I never hear anyone mention the fact that before Charles Whitman went up to that tower, he first killed his mother, Margaret, and his wife, Kathy. And that includes this monologue from True Romance. You have James Gandolfini playing a seasoned criminal and killer, talking about how no matter what, the very first kill is the hardest. So even for that guy in Texas, that must have been the case with that very first dot that he shot from up in that tower. But of course, that first dot wouldn't have been his first kill. That would be his mother, followed by his wife. I've thought about this a lot, and I've always just kind of figured that it's the character played by James Gandolfini who doesn't know that Charles Whitman first killed his mom and his wife. I think that Quentin Tarantino does know that because I think he would have done his research. I'm certainly not accusing Quentin Tarantino of neglecting to show violence against women in his movies. I mean, there's literally a bleeding woman in the foreground of this shot, and I mean, this subject could be the subject of an entire other video that I'll make someday. If anything, Tarantino's choice to ignore the deaths of Margaret and Kathy Whitman here is actually a good screenwriting choice. It's streamlined, it's a great monologue, it's a great line. And that's the whole point in terms of the context of this scene. But the point that I'm making, just for me, and it's not like a mind-blowing one or anything, I just kind of like to invoke Abigail Adams here and ask you to remember the ladies. If and when you do talk about this particular mass shooting, and I think we should all be talking about the high frequency and history of mass shootings in America, I hope you'll also talk about this aspect of domestic violence. I know it's not the only time the two have gone hand in hand, and I know in this particular case, domestic violence was something that was all too familiar for both Margaret and Kathy Whitman. And there's a lot more that you could learn about that, and I encourage you to look into it on your own if you'd like. But that's all for me.